The shot rang out, silencing the festive chatter of Wildwood's annual harvest fair as Cassandra Wells stared into the cold, determined eyes of the bandit who gripped her arm. It was 1875, and what had begun as a day of celebration had transformed into a moment that would forever alter the course of her life. "Nobody move," the masked man snarled, pressing the barrel of his revolver against Cassandra's ribs as he backed toward his waiting horse. The fair-goers froze, their faces painted with horror as they watched the scene unfold beneath the autumn sun. Cassandra felt her heart hammering against her chest, the scratchy wool of the bandit's sleeve rough against her skin where he held her. The scent of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the sweet aroma of caramel apples and the earthy smell of hay that had, moments before, made the day so perfect. "Let her go." The voice cut through the silence, steady and dangerous. The crowd parted as a tall figure stepped forward, his stance wide and confident. Thomas Prescott's hand hovered near the holster at his hip, his eyes locked on the bandit who held Cassandra captive. The sunlight caught on the silver star pinned to his leather vest, not a sheriff's badge, but the mark of a deputy marshal who'd been tracking this outlaw across 3 territories. "She's spoken for," Thomas declared, his voice carrying across the fairground. The bandit's grip tightened around Cassandra's arm. "Then she'll fetch a handsome ransom, won't she?" he sneered. "No." Cassandra's voice was firm, surprising even herself. She'd been raised to be proper, demure, the daughter of a wealthy rancher who'd sent her east for schooling and expected her to marry well. But in that moment, something fierce awoke within her. "I am spoken for by no man." Thomas's eyes flickered to her face, momentary confusion crossing his features before returning to their steely resolve. This wasn't how hostage situations typically played out in his experience. "Shut your mouth, girl," the bandit hissed, yanking her closer. "I said let her go," Thomas repeated, taking another step forward. "This doesn't need to end bloody." The tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. Cassandra could feel the bandit's breath, quick and hot against her neck as he calculated his odds. 3 more men had materialized from the crowd, flanking Thomas' deputies who'd been enjoying the fair until duty called. With a curse, the bandit shoved Cassandra toward Thomas and fired wildly into the air, causing the crowd to scatter in panic. He leapt onto his horse and spurred it into motion, dust billowing behind him as he fled toward the tree line that bordered the fairgrounds. Thomas caught Cassandra as she stumbled forward, his hands steady and strong on her shoulders. "Are you hurt, miss?" "No, I'm fine," she replied, straightening her blue calico dress with trembling hands. He nodded curtly before turning to the other deputies. "Carson, Matthews with me. Bennett, stay with the lady." Without another word, Thomas vaulted onto his horse and thundered after the fleeing bandit, leaving Cassandra standing amidst the disrupted fair, her heart still racing from the encounter. "Madam, perhaps you should sit down," Deputy Bennett suggested, gesturing toward a nearby bench. Cassandra nodded, allowing herself to be led away from the scene. But as she sat watching Thomas and his companions disappear into the distance, she couldn't help but replay his words in her mind. "She's spoken for." The very thought made her blood boil. She had come west to escape that very notion that a woman was property to be claimed. Little did she know that this moment of defiance would be the first of many, and that the deputy who had come to her rescue would soon become both her greatest ally and her most formidable challenge in a land where both danger and opportunity awaited at every turn. As the sun began to set over the fairgrounds, turning the sky into a canvas of crimson and gold, Thomas returned with his deputies. The bandit was slumped over his horse, hands bound behind his back, a trail of blood staining his shirt sleeve. The crowd that had reassembled at the fair parted for them, whispers trailing in their wake. Cassandra stood as they approached, her posture rigid despite her still shaking hands. "Miss Wells," Thomas acknowledged with a nod as he dismounted. "I believe this belongs to you." He held out her reticule, a small beaded bag she hadn't even realized was missing in the chaos. "Thank you, Deputy." "Prescott, Thomas Prescott." He tipped his hat, a gesture so quintessentially Western that Cassandra might have smiled under different circumstances. "Thank you for your assistance, Deputy Prescott, though I must say I take issue with your methods." His eyebrows rose slightly. "My methods?" "Yes, she's spoken for, as if I were a parcel of land with a deed of ownership." Cassandra met his gaze directly, refusing to be cowed by his official status or imposing presence. A hint of a smile played at the corner of Thomas's mouth. "My apologies, Miss Wells. I was attempting to dissuade him from taking you." Most bandits respect the claim of another man more than they respect a woman's right to her own autonomy. His words caught her off guard. She hadn't expected such forthright acknowledgement from a man who embodied the rugged frontier spirit. "Well," she said, slightly mollified, "I appreciate your honesty, at least. Will you be all right getting home?" he asked, glancing at the darkening sky. "My father's ranch is just beyond the creek. I have my wagon." She gestured toward a modest buckboard hitched at the edge of the fairgrounds. Thomas nodded, then turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "Show's over, folks. The fair committee says the festivities will continue tomorrow, assuming the weather holds." As the onlookers began to disperse, returning to what remained of the day's activities, Thomas looked back at Cassandra. "You should know, Miss Wells, that Bandit wasn't working alone. He's part of the Blackwater gang. They've been terrorizing towns all across the territory. If they targeted you specifically, they may try again." Cassandra felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm evening air. "Why would they target me? Your father is Edmund Wells, is he not? One of the wealthiest ranchers in the region," she nodded slowly. "Then you already have your answer." He adjusted his hat, shadows playing across his face in the fading light. "I'd advise extra caution in the coming days. Lock your doors and don't travel alone if you can help it." "I appreciate your concern, Deputy Prescott, but I am quite capable of looking after myself." Even as she spoke the words, Cassandra knew they rang somewhat hollow after the day's events. A smile finally broke across his face, genuine, if a bit weary. "I don't doubt that, Miss Wells. But everyone needs help sometimes, even the most capable among us." With that, he tipped his hat once more and returned to his horse, leading the captured bandit toward the small jailhouse at the edge of town. Cassandra watched him go, a mixture of irritation and reluctant admiration stirring within her. As she climbed into her wagon and took up the reins, Cassandra couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with Deputy Thomas Prescott was far from over. Whether that prospect thrilled or dismayed her, she couldn't quite say. The Wells Ranch sprawled across 500 acres of prime Montana territory, its white painted main house visible from miles away atop a gentle rise. By the time Cassandra arrived home, the lamps were lit in the windows, casting golden rectangles onto the darkened yard. Her father stood on the porch, his imposing figure silhouetted against the light from the doorway. "You're late," Edmund Wells called as she pulled the wagon to a stop. "I was about to send the boys out looking for you." Cassandra gathered her skirts and climbed down, the events of the day weighing heavily on her shoulders. "There was trouble at the fair, father." Edmund descended the steps, concern replacing his stern expression as he drew closer and saw the state of his daughter. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. There was a bandit. He tried to take me, but Deputy Prescott intervened." Her father's face darkened. "Inside, now." In the warmth of the ranch house's parlor, Cassandra recounted the day's events to her father and their housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, who clucked and fussed, pressing a cup of hot tea into her hands. "The Blackwater gang," Edmund muttered, pacing before the fireplace. "They've been getting bolder by the month. First, it was rustling cattle, then robbing stage coaches. Now they're targeting young women in broad daylight. Deputy Prescott suggested they might have targeted me specifically because of you," Cassandra said quietly. Edmund stopped pacing. "It's possible. I've made enemies over the years, men who resent my success, my influence with the territorial governor." He sighed heavily, the lines on his weather-beaten face deepening. "Perhaps it's time I reconsidered your mother's suggestion of sending you back east." Cassandra set her teacup down with more force than necessary. "I won't go. I've spent 4 years in Boston getting an education I can't use because I'm a woman. I came back to make a difference here." "And what difference will you make if you're kidnapped or worse?" her father countered. "I survived today, didn't I?" She stood, smoothing her skirts with determined hands. "Besides, Deputy Prescott captured the bandit. Perhaps he'll reveal the gang's plans under questioning." Edmund shook his head. "Don't put too much faith in Thomas Prescott. He's a capable lawman, I'll grant you that, but he's also ambitious and not always discerning about his methods." "You know him?" Cassandra asked, surprised. "This territory isn't so large that men in positions of authority don't cross paths." "He was appointed by Judge Hollister, a man I've had my disagreements with." Edmund's tone made it clear that disagreements was a polite understatement. Cassandra considered this new information. "He seemed honorable enough, if somewhat presumptuous." Her father's eyes narrowed. "How so?" "He told the bandit I was spoken for, as if that should matter more than my own objection to being kidnapped." A smile tugged at Edmund's mouth. "And I imagine you let him know your thoughts on that matter." "I did." "Your mother's spirit lives on in you," he said softly, his expression momentarily distant with memory. Marjorie Wells had been dead for 10 years, but her fierce independence and sharp wit remained legendary in the territory. "All the more reason to keep you safe." "I won't live in fear, father," Cassandra said firmly. Edmund studied his daughter for a long moment, pride and worry battling in his gaze. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, but you'll take precautions. No more traveling alone, even to town. And I'm assigning one of the ranch hands to accompany you when you insist on your teaching visits to the homesteader families." Cassandra nodded, knowing this was as much of a compromise as she was likely to get. Since returning from Boston, she'd taken it upon herself to provide basic education to the children of the scattered families who worked small claims on the frontier's edge, families who couldn't afford to send their children to the territorial school in town. "Thank you, father." She kissed his cheek, the bristles of his beard rough against her lips. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." As Cassandra climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she found her thoughts returning to Thomas Prescott. There had been something in his eyes, a shrewdness, an intelligence that belied the rough-hewn exterior he presented to the world. And despite her irritation at his words, she couldn't deny the way her heart had quickened when he'd stepped forward to defend her. She shook her head at her own foolishness. She had not come back west to lose herself in romantic notions about a lawman with questionable allegiances. She had work to do, important work, and she wouldn't let today's events deter her from her purpose. Still, as she prepared for bed, the memory of Thomas's steady gaze remained with her, an unspoken challenge that both unsettled and intrigued her in equal measure. The Wildwood jailhouse was little more than a sturdy cabin with 2 cells, an office, and a small back room where Thomas had set up his living quarters when he'd first arrived 6 months ago. It wasn't much, but it served its purpose in a town that rarely saw more than a handful of drunken cowboys or the occasional petty thief. Tonight, however, one of the cells held a prize worth celebrating. Elias Dowd, known associate of the notorious Wade Thornton, leader of the Blackwater gang. If Thomas could get him to talk, they might finally have a chance at bringing down the outlaws who'd been terrorizing the territory. "He ain't said nothing but cusses since we locked him up," Deputy Carson reported, leaning against the doorframe of Thomas's office. "Matthews is watching him now." Thomas nodded, cleaning his revolver methodically at his desk. "He'll talk. Men like him always do when the noose starts feeling real." "You think Judge Hollister will sentence him to hang for attempted kidnapping of Edmund Wells's daughter, without question?" Thomas reassembled his gun with practiced ease. "Wells has the judge's ear and half the territorial legislature in his pocket." Carson shifted uncomfortably. "Seems a bit harsh for a failed attempt. The lady wasn't hurt." Thomas holstered his weapon and stood. "Justice works differently depending on who you've wronged. That's the way of things out here." His tone was matter of fact, but there was an edge to it that suggested he didn't necessarily approve of the system he served. "What about the lady?" Carson asked. "Miss Wells, she seemed spirited." A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. Spirited is one way to put it. Most women would have been in hysterics after what happened. Most women haven't been raised by Edmund Wells after being educated back east, Carson pointed out. Word as she came back against his wishes, insisted on staying even when he offered her a life of luxury in Boston. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You seem well informed about the Wells family affairs, Carson shrugged. My sister works as a maid at the ranch. Here's things. Well, Miss Wells's character is her own business, Thomas said, reaching for his hat. Our concern is making sure Dowd tells us what we need to know about his associates. He made his way to the cells, where Deputy Matthews sat on a stool, whittling a piece of wood while keeping a bored eye on their prisoner. Elias Dowd glared from the shadows of his cell, his left arm crudely bandaged where Thomas's bullet had grazed him during the chase. Evening, Dowd, Thomas said pleasantly, pulling up a chair. How's the arm? Go to hell, lawman, Dowd spat. I expect I will eventually, but you'll be getting there a fair bit sooner if you don't cooperate. Thomas leaned forward, his voice dropping. Attempted kidnapping of a prominent citizen's daughter carries a heavy penalty in this territory. Judge Hollister isn't known for his mercy. Fear flickered across Dowd's face before he masked it with defiance. I ain't saying nothing about Wade or the others. I ain't no snitch. Thomas smiled coldly. You just did. Confirmed Wade Thornton's involvement in today's events. That's a start, Dowd cursed, realizing his mistake. Look, Thomas continued, I don't particularly care about you, Dowd. You're small time, a follower. But Wade Thornton has blood on his hands. The stagecoach robbery last month left 3 people dead, including a child. He needs to answer for that. That wasn't supposed to happen, Dowd muttered. The driver wasn't supposed to fight back. Thomas sensed an opening. But he did, and now innocent people are dead. You want their blood on your conscience too, because the judge will see it that way. Accessory to murder, sweat beaded on Dowd's forehead. What are you offering? Tell me where Thornton's hiding. Tell me what he's planning next. Do that, and I'll speak to the judge about leniency, prison instead of the gallows. Dowd was silent for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The old Sullivan mine, north of Bear Creek, that's where we've been holed up. And today's attempt to grab Miss Wells. What was the plan there? Ransom. Wade figured Wells would pay anything to get his precious daughter back, said it'd be easier than robbing 10 stagecoaches. Dowd's eyes darted nervously to the window. Wade's gonna kill me if he finds out I talked. He won't get the chance if I have anything to say about it, Thomas assured him, though in truth, he knew how resourceful Thornton could be. The outlaw had evaded capture for nearly 2 years, always staying one step ahead of the law. Is he planning anything else? Another kidnapping attempt? Dowd hesitated, then nodded. He said if the fair didn't work out, we'd try again at the Founders' Day dance next week, said it'd be easier with everyone distracted by the festivities. Thomas stood, processing this information. Matthews, get him some food and tend to that arm properly. Carson, saddle up. We need to inform the sheriff and gather a posse. Now, Carson looked surprised. It's the middle of the night. Thornton's not going to wait for daylight if he gets wind that Dowd's been captured. We need to move fast. Thomas grabbed his coat and checked his ammunition. And someone needs to warn Edmund Wells that his daughter is still in danger. As they prepared to ride out into the darkness, Thomas found his thoughts returning to Cassandra Wells and her defiant declaration. I am spoken for by no man. There was something about her that had gotten under his skin, a strength and determination that matched his own. But he pushed those thoughts aside. His job was to protect her and the other citizens of Wildwood, not to admire her spirit, no matter how compelling it might be. Dawn was breaking over the eastern ridge when Thomas and Sheriff Blackburn returned to town, weary and empty-handed. The raid on the Sullivan mine had yielded nothing but abandoned campfires and discarded supplies, evidence that the Blackwater gang had been there, but had moved on, perhaps tipped off by a sympathizer in town. Get some rest, Prescott, Sheriff Blackburn advised as they dismounted in front of the jailhouse. You've been going since yesterday morning. Thomas nodded, too tired to argue. What about Wells? Someone needs to inform him about the continued threat. "I'll send a rider out to the ranch later today," Blackburn promised. "For now, we all need to regroup." Reluctantly, Thomas agreed and retreated to his sparse quarters behind the jailhouse. He stripped off his dusty clothes and collapsed onto his narrow bed, sleep claiming him almost instantly. He dreamed of dark eyes flashing with defiance, of a woman's voice clear and unwavering in the face of danger. In his dream, he reached for her, but she remained just beyond his grasp, always independent, always moving forward on her own path. When he awoke several hours later, the sun was high in the sky, and the town of Wildwood was bustling with its usual midday activity. Thomas washed and dressed quickly, his mind already turning over their next move against Thornton and his gang. As he stepped into the main office, he found Deputy Bennett engaged in conversation with a familiar figure, Cassandra Wells herself, dressed in a simple but elegant riding habit, her chestnut hair neatly coiled beneath a small hat. "Miss Wells," Thomas acknowledged, trying to mask his surprise. "What brings you to our humble establishment?" Cassandra turned to face him, her posture as straight and proud as it had been the day before. "Deputy Prescott, I was just inquiring about the bandit from yesterday. Deputy Bennett informs me you've been out all night pursuing his associates." "With limited success, I'm afraid," Thomas admitted, "though we did learn some valuable information from Mr. Dowd." "Oh," her eyebrow arched with interest. "And does this information concern my father or myself?" Thomas hesitated, glancing at Bennett, who took the hint and busied himself with some paperwork at the far desk. "Perhaps we could speak privately, Miss Wells." Thomas gestured to his small office. Once inside with the door closed, Thomas didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Dowd confirmed that you were targeted specifically for ransom due to your father's wealth. He also revealed that the Blackwater gang plans to make another attempt at Founders' Day next week." Cassandra absorbed this information with remarkable composure. "I see. And you were planning to inform my father of this when, exactly?" "Sheriff Blackburn is sending a rider to your ranch today. We only returned at dawn." She nodded, seeming to accept this explanation. "Well, I've saved you the trouble. I'm here in town on business, and I'll be returning to the ranch this afternoon. I can relay the information myself." Thomas studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes. "With all due respect, Miss Wells, this isn't a matter to be taken lightly. The Blackwater gang is dangerous. They've killed before. I'm well aware of the seriousness of the situation, Deputy. That's precisely why I'm here." She straightened a glove with deliberate care. "I've come to request official protection during the Founders' Day celebrations. Not for myself, I'm quite capable of avoiding social gatherings, but for the event itself. Many of my students and their families will be in attendance, and I won't have them put at risk because of me." Thomas blinked, caught off guard by her request. "Your students?" "Yes. I provide education to several homesteader families in the area. Their children deserve a night of celebration without danger lurking in the shadows." Her gaze was direct, challenging him to dismiss her concerns. "That's commendable," Thomas said, genuinely impressed by her thoughtfulness. "Rest assured, we'll have extra deputies on duty that night, and we hope to apprehend Thornton and his men before then." "Hope is not a strategy, Deputy Prescott." Cassandra's voice was crisp. "What if you don't find them in time?" Thomas leaned against his desk, considering her question. "Then we use their plan against them. If they're expecting to find you at the dance, perhaps we can set a trap." A spark of interest lit her eyes. "You mean use me as bait?" "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "I mean create the appearance that you'll be there while keeping you safely elsewhere." "And if I refuse to be kept safely elsewhere?" she challenged. "If I choose to attend the dance despite the risk," Thomas felt a headache forming behind his eyes. "Then you'll be putting yourself and others in unnecessary danger, Miss Wells. Or providing an opportunity to capture these outlaws once and for all," she countered. "I won't cower in fear while these men terrorize our community, Deputy. That's not who I am." There it was again, that fierce independence that both frustrated and fascinated him. Thomas straightened, crossing his arms over his chest. "Your courage is admirable, but this isn't a game or an adventure from a dime novel. Real people could get hurt. I'm well aware of that, she said, a hint of steel entering her voice. I've lived in this territory long enough to understand its dangers. My father may see me as his sheltered daughter returning from finishing school, but I assure you, Deputy Prescott, I'm not naive. They stood in silence for a moment, sizing each other up like duelists before the draw. Finally, Thomas spoke. Let me discuss the matter with Sheriff Blackburn. If we decide a controlled operation at the dance is our best option, we'll consider your involvement, but I make no promises. Cassandra nodded, seeming satisfied with this concession. Very well. I appreciate your consideration. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at him. By the way, Deputy, I never thanked you properly for your intervention yesterday. Despite my objection to your choice of words, your actions were brave and timely. Thomas inclined his head slightly. Just doing my job, Miss Wells. Nevertheless, thank you. With that, she swept out of his office, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and the distinct impression that Cassandra Wells was going to complicate his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Through the window, Thomas watched as she mounted her horse with practiced ease, not side saddle as most ladies would, but astride like a man. A ranch hand waited nearby on horseback, presumably the escort her father had insisted upon. As they rode away, Thomas found himself wondering what other surprises Cassandra Wells might have in store. The Wells Ranch was alive with activity when Cassandra returned, ranch hands moving cattle between pastures, preparing for the approaching autumn months when the herds would need to be closer to the sheltered valleys. She handed her horse to a stable boy and made her way to the main house, her mind still turning over her conversation with Deputy Prescott. She found her father in his study, poring over account ledgers, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as she entered, a smile warming his weathered features. There you are. How was town? Informative, Cassandra replied, settling into a chair across from his desk. I spoke with Deputy Prescott. It seems the bandit has revealed some details about the Blackwater gang's intentions. Edmund's expression grew serious as she relayed what Thomas had told her, his frown deepening at the mention of the planned attempt at Founder's Day. Out of the question, he declared when she finished. You won't be attending. Cassandra had anticipated this reaction. Father, I can't simply hide away whenever there's a threat. Besides, many of my students' families will be there. I have a responsibility to them. Your responsibility is to stay alive, Edmund countered, removing his spectacles and pinching the bridge of his nose. I've already lost your mother. I won't lose you too, especially not to scum like Wade Thornton. Deputy Prescott is considering using the dance as an opportunity to capture Thornton and his gang, Cassandra pressed. With proper planning and protection, Thomas Prescott is ambitious and reckless, Edmund interrupted. He'd risk anything for a chance to enhance his reputation by capturing Thornton. Including my safety, Cassandra asked quietly. Her father hesitated, then sighed. Not intentionally, perhaps, but men like Prescott see the bigger picture, not the individuals caught up in their schemes. Cassandra considered this assessment. He seemed genuinely concerned for the townspeople's safety, and he was adamant that I shouldn't put myself at risk. A knowing look crossed Edmund's face. Did that make you more or less inclined to cooperate with him? Father, Cassandra protested, though a flush rose to her cheeks. Edmund chuckled. You are so like your mother, she could never abide being told what she could or couldn't do either. His expression sobered. But this is different, Cassandra. These men are killers. All the more reason they need to be stopped, she insisted. And if my presence at the dance can help make that happen, isn't it worth considering? Edmund studied his daughter for a long moment, pride and worry warring in his gaze. I can see your mind is set on this, but I have conditions. You'll wear protective gear beneath your dress, a light hunting vest at minimum. You'll be armed, and you'll have at least 2 of our most trusted ranch hands with you at all times, in addition to whatever protection the law provides. Cassandra nodded, surprised and grateful for his concession. Agreed. And, Edmund added firmly, if Thomas Prescott or Sheriff Blackburn gives you an order to leave or take cover, you'll obey it without question. This isn't a negotiation, Cassandra. It's the only way I'll allow this. Yes, father, she rose and kissed his cheek. Thank you for understanding. Edmund caught her hand. I don't understand, not really, but I do know that keeping you in a gilded cage would only make you miserable. Your mother taught me that lesson well enough. Cassandra squeezed his hand. I'll be careful, I promise. As she left the study, Cassandra felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation flutter in her chest. The Founders' Day dance was only a week away, and much could happen before then. But one thing was certain: she would face whatever came on her own terms, not cowering in fear or allowing others to determine her fate. That night, she dreamed of dancing under lantern light, of strong hands guiding her through a waltz, and of dark, watchful eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed defenses. When she awoke, the memory of Thomas Prescott's face lingered in her mind, raising questions she wasn't quite ready to answer. The week leading up to Founders' Day passed in a flurry of activity. Thomas and Sheriff Blackburn led daily patrols through the surrounding countryside, searching for any sign of the Blackwater gang, but the outlaws remained frustratingly elusive. Meanwhile, the town of Wildwood prepared for its annual celebration, with bunting and lanterns decorating the main street and the large barn at the edge of town transformed into a dance hall. On the fourth day, Thomas rode out to the Wells ranch, ostensibly to update Edmund on their security plans for the dance. In reality, he wanted to see Cassandra again, to gauge her resolve and perhaps convince her to reconsider her involvement. He found her not in the main house, but in a small cabin at the edge of the property that served as a schoolroom for her students. Through the open window, he could hear her clear voice explaining the basics of geometry to a half-dozen children of varying ages. Thomas dismounted and tethered his horse to a nearby post, then approached the cabin quietly, not wanting to interrupt the lesson. He stood outside, listening as Cassandra patiently guided a young boy through a difficult problem, her encouragement firm but kind. When the lesson concluded and the children filed out, chattering excitedly about the upcoming dance, Thomas stepped into view. The children eyed him curiously, some with the natural wariness that frontier children often showed toward authority figures. "Deputy Prescott," Cassandra said, surprise evident in her voice as she emerged from the cabin. "I wasn't expecting you, Miss Wells." He tipped his hat to her. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, we've just finished for the day." She turned to the children. "Remember your assignments for next week. And yes, Billy, you may demonstrate your geometry knowledge by calculating the area of the dance floor on Founders' Day." The boy grinned, clearly pleased with this practical application of his lessons, before scampering off with the others toward the waiting wagon that would return them to their homes. Cassandra watched them go with obvious affection before turning back to Thomas. "What brings you all the way out here, Deputy?" "Sheriff Blackburn and I have been finalizing security arrangements for the dance," Thomas explained. "I wanted to discuss some specifics with your father and with you if you're still determined to attend." "I am," she confirmed, gathering her teaching materials from a nearby bench, "though I appreciate your concern." Thomas followed her back toward the main house, leading his horse. "It's not concern, Miss Wells, it's strategy. If you're going to be part of this operation, I need to know you'll follow directions when it matters." Cassandra stopped walking and faced him directly. "I'm not one of your deputies to command, Deputy Prescott. I agreed to certain conditions with my father, which include heeding orders in emergency situations. But I won't be treated as a helpless bystander or a piece of bait." Thomas held her gaze, admiring her spirit despite his frustration. "Fair enough. But understand that my priority is keeping everyone safe, including you, especially you since you're Thornton's primary target." Something softened in her expression. "I understand, and I appreciate that. I'm not being willfully difficult, Deputy. I simply believe that I have a right to stand up against those who would threaten my community." "Call me Thomas," he said suddenly. "If we're going to work together on this, the formality seems excessive." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a small smile. "Very well, Thomas. And you may call me Cassandra." The sound of her name on his lips felt both natural and somehow significant. Cassandra, a fitting name. How so? In Greek mythology, Cassandra was blessed with the gift of prophecy but cursed that no one would believe her warnings. He smiled slightly. You seem similarly determined to make people listen to you against convention. Her eyes widened. You know Greek mythology. It was Thomas's turn to look surprised. I wasn't always a deputy marshal in the territories, you know. I attended university back east before the war. The war. She questioned softly. Thomas nodded, his expression closing slightly. I served with the Union Army. After it ended, I couldn't go back to academia. The West seemed like a place where a man could make a difference. Cassandra studied him with new interest. It seems we both came west seeking purpose beyond what society prescribed for us. Perhaps, Thomas acknowledged, though I suspect our reasons differ in the particulars. They had reached the main house now, and a ranch hand approached to take Thomas's horse to the stable. Edmund Wells appeared on the porch, his expression guarded as he observed his daughter's easy manner with the deputy. Prescott, he greeted, not unkindly but with clear reservation. What brings you to my property? Security matters regarding Founders' Day, Mr. Wells, Thomas replied professionally. I thought it best to discuss them in person. Edmund nodded. Come inside, then. No sense standing out in the heat. In Edmund's study, Thomas outlined the security measures they had planned. Deputies positioned at all entrances and along the perimeter of the dance, plainclothes officers mingling with the crowd, and a signal system to alert everyone if trouble arose. Cassandra will be accompanied by 2 of your ranch hands, as I understand it, Thomas concluded. We'll also have Deputy Bennett specifically assigned to remain near her throughout the evening. Edmund nodded approvingly. And what of Thornton and his men? Any sign of them? None yet, Thomas admitted, but our informants in neighboring settlements report that they've been seen gathering supplies. They're planning something. And you're certain it's the dance they're targeting? Edmund pressed. As certain as we can be based on Dowd's information. But Thornton is cunning. He may have alternative plans we're not aware of. Cassandra, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. What if they don't make their move at the dance itself? What if they wait until people are returning home when they're more vulnerable? Thomas considered this. It's possible we'll have patrols on the main roads after the dance concludes, but we can't cover every possible route. Then perhaps I should leave early conspicuously, Cassandra suggested. Draw them out on a route we can control. Edmund frowned. Absolutely not. You're not going to deliberately expose yourself. Your father's right, Thomas agreed. The goal is to capture Thornton without putting you at risk. And if that's not possible, Cassandra challenged, if the only way to ensure he's caught is to allow him to make his attempt. Thomas met her determined gaze. Then we'll reassess, but not until we've exhausted every other option. Edmund seemed satisfied with this answer, but Thomas could see that Cassandra wasn't. She had a reckless courage that worried him, a willingness to put herself in harm's way for what she believed was right. As the meeting concluded and Thomas prepared to leave, Cassandra walked him to his horse, out of her father's earshot. You placated my father, but you didn't answer my question, she said quietly. What if allowing Thornton to make his move is the only way to stop him? Thomas checked his saddle straps before turning to face her. Then I would still prioritize your safety over his capture. There will be other opportunities to bring Thornton to justice. But more people could be hurt in the meantime, she argued. Yes, he acknowledged. That's the burden of wearing this badge. Sometimes you can't save everyone, and you have to make choices that keep you awake at night. He studied her face, seeing the conflict there. This isn't an academic exercise, Cassandra. These are life and death decisions. I know that, she said softly, but sometimes one person's risk can prevent greater suffering. Isn't that what courage is? Thomas felt something stir within him, admiration mingled with a protective instinct he hadn't expected to feel so strongly. There's a fine line between courage and foolhardiness. I've seen too many good people cross it and never come back. Cassandra's eyes searched his, perhaps recognizing the personal pain behind his words. "I'll be careful, Thomas, I promise," he nodded, not entirely convinced but knowing further argument was futile. "I'll hold you to that." He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "Until Founder's Day, then." "Until then," she echoed. As Thomas rode away, he glanced back to see Cassandra still watching him, her figure silhouetted against the golden afternoon light. The image stayed with him long after he'd returned to town, a reminder of what was at stake in the coming confrontation with the Blackwater gang. Founder's Day dawned clear and crisp, with the first hint of autumn's chill in the air. By midday, Wildwood was transformed, its usually dusty main street lined with stalls selling everything from homemade preserves to hand-carved toys. Children darted between adults, their laughter carrying on the breeze, while musicians tuned their instruments near the newly decorated dance barn. Thomas stationed his deputies strategically throughout the festivities, their presence visible but not obtrusive. Sheriff Blackburn had ridden to the neighboring town of Pinecrest to request additional lawmen, returning with 3 experienced deputies who now patrolled the outskirts of the celebration. As the afternoon wore on with no sign of trouble, Thomas felt his tension mounting rather than easing. Thornton was too smart to make his move in broad daylight with so many lawmen present. The dance tonight was the more likely target when darkness provided cover and the townspeople were distracted by music and merriment. By sunset, the celebration had moved to the barn, where lanterns cast a warm glow over the festivities. Thomas positioned himself near the main entrance, watching as Wildwood's residents arrived in their finest attire. The women wore colorful dresses saved for special occasions, while the men had traded their work clothes for clean shirts and polished boots. Thomas himself had made an effort, wearing a dark suit that he had seldom had occasion to use since coming west. Several of the unmarried women in town cast appreciative glances his way, but his attention was focused elsewhere, scanning the crowd for any sign of Thornton's men, and, if he was honest with himself, watching for Cassandra's arrival. When she finally appeared at the entrance, Thomas momentarily forgot his duties. Cassandra wore a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her chestnut hair, which was arranged in an elegant style with small flowers woven through the curls. She moved with a natural grace that set her apart from the other young women, her posture confident but not haughty. Flanking her were 2 burly ranch hands from the Wells property, both subtly armed beneath their dress clothes. Edmund Wells followed behind, his protective gaze never leaving his daughter as she greeted friends and acquaintances. Thomas made his way through the crowd to meet them. "Mr. Wells, Cassandra," he greeted, noting the slight widening of her eyes at his appearance. "Everything is secure so far. Deputy Bennett will remain nearby throughout the evening." Bennett, a capable young deputy with a friendly demeanor, nodded from a few feet away. "Miss Wells, it would be my honor to request the first dance, if that's acceptable." Cassandra smiled warmly. "Of course, Deputy Bennett. Though I warn you, I learned to dance in Boston drawing rooms, not frontier barn dances." "You'll do fine," Bennett assured her. "The music's about to start." As Bennett led Cassandra onto the dance floor, Thomas turned to Edmund. "We've doubled the patrols around the perimeter. If Thornton or his men approach, we'll know." Edmund nodded, his eyes still on his daughter. She insisted on wearing her mother's dress, said if she was going to face danger, she wanted to do it with Marjorie's spirit with her. He glanced at Thomas. "My wife would have approved of her courage, even while worrying herself sick." Thomas watched as Cassandra moved gracefully through the dance, her blue skirts swirling around her. "She's remarkable," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. Edmund's gaze sharpened. "She is. And she deserves better than to be caught between outlaws and lawmen with personal vendettas." "I don't have a vendetta against Thornton," Thomas protested. "Don't you? I've heard the stories, Prescott, about how Thornton's gang killed your partner in Colorado before you came here." Edmund's voice was low but clear. "I understand the desire for justice, but I won't have my daughter used as a pawn in your quest for it." Thomas stiffened, surprised that Edmund knew about his past. "My partner was also my brother-in-law," he said quietly. My sister was left a widow with 2 young children, but this isn't about vengeance. It's about preventing Thornton from hurting anyone else. Edmund studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if reaching some internal decision. See that it stays that way. The dance ended and Cassandra returned to them, her cheeks flushed with exertion and excitement. "Father, you should join in the next dance. Mrs. Hollister was just saying she hasn't seen you enjoy yourself in ages." Edmund smiled fondly at his daughter. "Perhaps later. For now, I'm content to watch you." "Then I shall have to find another partner," Cassandra declared, turning to Thomas. "Deputy Prescott, or would dancing interfere with your duties?" Thomas hesitated, acutely aware of Edmund's scrutiny. "I should maintain my position by the entrance." "Nonsense," Sheriff Blackburn interrupted, appearing beside them. "We're well covered, Prescott. One dance won't compromise security." Cassandra's eyes held a challenge that Thomas found impossible to resist. "Very well," he conceded, offering his arm. "Though I should warn you, I'm more accustomed to tracking outlaws than following dance steps." "I'll take my chances," she replied with a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. As they joined the other couples on the floor, the musicians struck up a waltz, a more formal dance than the usual frontier reels and jigs. Thomas placed his hand carefully at Cassandra's waist, feeling the structured bodice beneath the silk of her gown. "Is that a protective vest you're wearing?" he murmured as they began to move with the music. "My father insisted," she confirmed, "though I doubt it would stop a determined bullet." "Let's hope we don't have to test that theory," Thomas replied, guiding her into a turn. Despite his earlier disclaimer, he moved with confidence, his steps precise and measured. "You dance very well for a man who tracks outlaws," Cassandra observed, her eyes bright with interest. "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly. Said it was the mark of a gentleman, regardless of profession." Thomas found himself relaxing into the familiar rhythm, enjoying the weight of Cassandra's hand in his own. "And what profession did she envision for you? Surely not a deputy marshal in Montana Territory." Thomas smiled slightly. "She hoped I'd follow my father into law. I did study it before the war changed everything." Cassandra's expression sobered. "The war changed many things for many people." "Yes," Thomas agreed. "It has a way of clarifying what matters, what's worth fighting for." "And what is worth fighting for, in your estimation?" she asked, her gaze direct and searching. Thomas considered the question as they moved across the floor, aware of the curious glances from other dancers who noted the deputy's apparent interest in the wealthy rancher's daughter. "Justice," he said finally. "Not just the letter of the law, but true justice, protecting those who can't protect themselves, ensuring that strength and wealth don't determine who thrives and who suffers." Cassandra studied his face. "That's a noble aim, though perhaps idealistic in a world that often rewards the opposite." "Perhaps," Thomas acknowledged. "But without ideals to strive for, what separates us from men like Thornton, who take whatever they want through force and intimidation?" "Nothing, I suppose," Cassandra replied thoughtfully, "though I wonder if Thornton ever had a chance at those ideals, or if his path was determined by circumstances beyond his control." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You sympathize with him?" "No," she said firmly. "I merely try to understand the roots of violence and injustice. My students come from all walks of life, some from families that have known nothing but hardship and brutality. Breaking that cycle requires more than just punishing wrongdoers." Thomas was struck by the depth of her thinking, so at odds with the superficial concerns of many young women of her station. "You're quite the philosopher, Miss Wells." "Hardly," she laughed. "Just a woman who believes education can transform lives, much like you believe justice can." The music was drawing to a close, and Thomas reluctantly prepared to release her. "Perhaps they're not so different, our beliefs." Before Cassandra could respond, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. Deputy Carson burst into the barn, his expression urgent as he scanned the crowd for Thomas. "Excuse me," Thomas said to Cassandra, his hand instinctively moving to his concealed weapon as he made his way toward Carson. "Riders approaching from the north," Carson reported in a low voice. 6 men, armed, one matches Thornton's description. Thomas's mind raced through their prepared contingencies. Alert the other deputies, get the women and children to the back of the barn, away from the windows, and find Bennett. Tell him to stay with Miss Wells at all costs. Carson nodded and disappeared into the crowd just as the first gunshot split the night air outside, followed by a woman's scream. The music abruptly ceased, replaced by panicked murmurs as the townspeople realized something was wrong. Sheriff Blackburn appeared at Thomas's side. "Thornton." "Looks like it," Thomas confirmed grimly. "They're earlier than expected and more direct. They must have spotted our patrols and decided to change tactics," Blackburn surmised. "Bold move, attacking with so many lawmen present." "Or desperate," Thomas countered, scanning the crowd for Cassandra. He spotted her with her father and Deputy Bennett, already moving toward the designated safe area at the back of the barn. More shots rang out, closer now, and the barn's main doors burst open. Wade Thornton stood framed in the entrance, his lean figure silhouetted against the night sky, a revolver in each hand. 4 men flanked him, their faces partially obscured by bandanas, but their intentions clear in the weapons they brandished. "Evening, folks," Thornton drawled, his voice carrying easily over the frightened whispers of the crowd. "Sorry to interrupt your festivities, but I'm looking for someone. A Miss Cassandra Wells. I hear she's the belle of the ball tonight." Thomas moved swiftly to position himself between the outlaws and the crowd, his gun drawn but not yet aimed. "You're surrounded, Thornton. There are lawmen at every exit. Lower your weapons." Thornton's gaze fixed on Thomas, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Deputy Prescott. I was hoping to run into you, still carrying that chip on your shoulder over what happened in Colorado." "This isn't about Colorado," Thomas replied evenly. "It's about you terrorizing innocent people across 3 territories. It ends tonight." "Does it now?" Thornton's smile widened. "I don't see it that way. I see it as me walking out of here with Edmund Wells's daughter and you letting it happen unless you want these good people caught in the crossfire." A tense silence fell over the barn as the townspeople huddled together, fear evident on their faces. Thomas was acutely aware of Sheriff Blackburn and the other deputies moving into position, waiting for his signal. But a direct confrontation here, with so many civilians present, was too risky. "Miss Wells isn't here," Thomas lied smoothly. "She was escorted home earlier as a precaution." Thornton laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Nice try, deputy. My men saw her arrive in that pretty blue dress. Now, where is she hiding?" From the corner of his eye, Thomas saw movement. Edmund Wells pushing through the crowd, his face set in determined lines. "I'm here, Thornton," Edmund called out, drawing all eyes to him. "Whatever quarrel you have, it's with me, not my daughter." Thornton turned his attention to the rancher, his expression calculating. "Wells. The man who's been buying up every water right and grazing permit in the territory, squeezing out the small ranchers until they have no choice but to sell to you at a fraction of what their land is worth." Edmund's jaw tightened. "I've never forced anyone to sell. I've offered fair prices for land that would otherwise lie fallow." "Fair according to who?" Thornton challenged. "The judge you bribed, the territorial officials in your pocket," he gestured with his gun. "You think you're better than me because you use the law to take what you want while I use these, but we're not so different, you and I." Thomas watched the exchange with growing concern. The longer Thornton talked, the more time his men had to position themselves throughout the barn. And if what he was saying about Edmund was true? "Enough," Thomas interrupted, drawing Thornton's focus back to him. "Whatever grievances you have can be addressed in a court of law, not at gunpoint." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Courts don't work for men like me, deputy. They work for men like Wells." He raised his voice, addressing the crowd. "How many of you have lost land or livestock because you couldn't access water that used to be free for all? How many have watched your children go hungry while Wells's herds grow fat?" A murmur ran through the crowd, and Thomas saw uncomfortable glances exchanged between some of the homesteaders present. There was truth in Thornton's words. He realized truth that complicated the black and white picture of justice he had been pursuing. But before he could respond, another figure emerged from the crowd. Cassandra, her blue dress unmistakable, her head held high despite Deputy Bennett's attempt to hold her back. "If you have a quarrel with my father's business practices, Mr. Thornton, perhaps you should have requested a meeting instead of terrorizing innocent people," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. "Violence only proves you lack the courage for civil discourse." Thornton stared at her, momentarily taken aback by her boldness. Then he smiled, a predatory expression that sent a chill down Thomas's spine. "Well, well, the lady herself offering me lessons in courage. I like your spirit, Miss Wells. It'll make our journey more interesting." "There won't be any journey," Thomas said, taking a step forward, his gun now aimed directly at Thornton's chest. "This ends here." The tension in the barn was palpable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Thomas could feel sweat beading on his forehead as he calculated the odds: 5 outlaws against 6 lawmen, but with dozens of civilians caught in between. The potential for bloodshed was enormous. Then, unexpectedly, Cassandra spoke again, her voice ringing clear in the silence. "Mr. Thornton, I propose a compromise. Release these people, all of them, and I will accompany you voluntarily to discuss your grievances against my father." "Cassandra, no," Edmund shouted, trying to reach her, but the crowd and Deputy Bennett held him back. Thornton's eyes gleamed with interest. "A bold offer, Miss Wells, but why should I trust you?" "Because unlike you, I keep my word," Cassandra replied. "And because I believe in justice, even when it's inconvenient. If my father has wronged you or others, I want to understand how." Thomas felt a surge of panic. This wasn't part of their plan. "Cassandra, don't do this," he urged, not taking his eyes off Thornton, but Cassandra had made her decision. She stepped forward, away from the protection of the crowd, her blue dress shimmering in the lantern light. "Well, Mr. Thornton, do we have an agreement?" Thornton studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We do, Miss Wells, though I'll need some insurance against your lawman friend here." "No harm comes to anyone in this room," Cassandra stipulated firmly. "Agreed, as long as they don't follow us for at least an hour." Thornton gestured to one of his men. "Jim, escort the lady out. The rest of you, cover our exit." Thomas felt paralyzed, torn between his duty to protect Cassandra and his responsibility to the townspeople. If he opened fire now, innocent people would surely be caught in the crossfire. But if he let Thornton take Cassandra— "Deputy," Cassandra said softly as she passed him, close enough that only he could hear, "trust me. Follow after an hour to the old Sullivan mine. That's where they were before, that's where they'll go again." Before Thomas could respond, she was moving toward the door, her head held high, every inch the daughter of a frontier aristocrat. Thornton watched her approach with undisguised admiration, then backed out of the barn, his men following while keeping their weapons trained on the crowd. The moment they disappeared into the night, the barn erupted into chaos: women crying, men shouting, children clinging to their parents in fear. Thomas turned to Sheriff Blackburn, his decision made. "Get everyone to safety, then gather every man who can ride. I'm going after them now." "Prescott, you heard Thornton's terms," Blackburn protested. "If we follow too soon, they won't harm her as long as she's valuable," Thomas cut him off. "But that won't last once they're safely away. I'm not waiting an hour." Edmund pushed through to them, his face ashen with fear and rage. "I'm coming with you. This is my daughter." Thomas nodded, not wasting time on arguments. "Can you still handle a rifle?" "Better than most men half my age," Edmund confirmed grimly. "Then saddle up. We leave in 5 minutes." Thomas turned to the other deputies. "Carson, Bennett, you're with me. The rest of you secure the town in case this is a diversion." As they hurried to their horses, Thomas tried to quiet the voice in his head that blamed him for letting Cassandra put herself in danger. She had acted on her own, against his explicit instructions, out of a courage that both infuriated and humbled him. Now all he could do was try to reach her before her bravery cost her her life. The night air was cool against Cassandra's face as Jim, the youngest-looking of Thornton's men, helped her onto a horse outside the barn. Despite her outward composure, her heart raced with fear and uncertainty. The plan had been for Thornton to attempt to take her while she was surrounded by lawmen, not for her to offer herself as a hostage. But when she had seen the terrified faces of her students and their families, she knew she couldn't risk their lives. "You ride well," Thornton observed as she settled into the saddle without assistance. "I was raised on a ranch," she replied simply, gathering the reins. Though usually with a proper saddle, not bareback, Thornton chuckled. "We didn't exactly plan for a lady passenger. You'll have to make do." He turned to his men. "Jim, you ride with Miss Wells. Keep her between you and me. The rest of you, spread out, watch for pursuit." As they rode away from town, Cassandra focused on memorizing their route, noting landmarks visible in the moonlight. If Thomas followed her instructions and waited an hour, she needed to leave as many clues as possible for him to follow. "You're very calm for someone who's just been kidnapped," Thornton remarked after they'd been riding for some time, their horses moving at a steady trot across open country. "Would hysteria improve my situation?" Cassandra countered, keeping her voice level despite the fear churning in her stomach. Thornton laughed again. "No, I suppose not. You're not what I expected, Miss Wells." "And what did you expect? A pampered princess, frightened of her own shadow." "Not a woman who'd offer herself as a hostage to protect a roomful of strangers." Cassandra considered her response carefully. "They weren't all strangers. Many were my students and their families. I teach at several homesteads in the area." Thornton glanced at her with new interest. "A teacher." "I thought you were fresh from some finishing school back east." "I attended college in Boston," Cassandra corrected him. "I studied literature, mathematics, and natural philosophy before returning here." "College," Thornton repeated, sounding impressed despite himself. "And you came back to teach frontier children rather than marry some Boston banker. Interesting choice." "Education is the only true path to equality," Cassandra said simply. "Without it, power remains in the hands of those who already possess it." Thornton was silent for a moment, digesting her words. "And yet you're the daughter of the most powerful man in the territory, the very embodiment of the inequality you claim to oppose." "I don't deny the privileges I've had," Cassandra acknowledged. "But I try to use them to help others gain access to the same opportunities." "Noble sentiments," Thornton said, his tone somewhere between mockery and genuine respect. "But do you know how your father made his fortune, how he continues to expand it at the expense of others?" Cassandra hesitated. Her father had always described his business dealings as fair and above board, but Thornton's accusations in the barn had stirred doubts she'd previously dismissed. "I know he works within the law." "The law," Thornton scoffed. "The law in these territories is written by men like your father, for men like your father. Did you know he diverted Bear Creek last spring, cut off water to 12 small ranches, including mine? When the ranchers protested, the territorial judge, your father's hunting companion, ruled in his favor. 3 families lost everything. 1 man took his own life." Cassandra felt sick. She had heard about the Bear Creek dispute, but her father had described it as a necessary irrigation project that would ultimately benefit the entire region. I didn't know the details. Of course not." Edmund Wells wouldn't want his educated daughter questioning his methods. Thornton's voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by a bitter certainty that was far more unsettling. They rode in silence for several minutes, Cassandra's mind wrestling with what she'd heard. Could her father really be responsible for such suffering? And if so, what did that make her, living in comfort bought with others' misery? "Why kidnapping?" she finally asked. "If what you say is true, why not seek redress through legal means?" Thornton's laugh was harsh in the darkness. "I tried that. Hired a lawyer from Helena with the last of my savings. He found evidence that your father had bribed the water commissioner to change the creek's designation on official maps. But the night before our court date, someone broke into the lawyer's office and stole the documents. The case was dismissed. And you believe my father was responsible for the theft?" "I know he was. Just like I know he arranged for my ranch to be burned to the ground a week later with my wife inside." Thornton's voice broke slightly on the last words, revealing the personal anguish beneath his outlaw persona. Cassandra gasped, horrified by the accusation. "No, my father would never." "He couldn't he?" Thornton challenged. "A man who sees other people's land and water as simply his for the taking." Who uses the law when it suits him and ignores it when it doesn't? What's one more death to secure what he wants? Before Cassandra could respond, one of the outlaws rode up alongside them, his expression urgent in the moonlight. "Riders coming, boss. Moving fast, at least 4 of them," Thornton cursed. "They didn't wait the hour. Jim, take Miss Wells ahead to the mine. The rest of you with me." "We'll delay them." Jim urged his horse forward, grabbing the reins of Cassandra's mount and leading her at a gallop toward the looming silhouette of a hillside in the distance. Behind them, Cassandra heard Thornton shouting orders to his men, then the distant pop of gunfire. Thomas, she thought with mingled hope and fear. He had come for her sooner than expected, but now he was riding into an ambush, and she was being taken further away toward a destination where more of Thornton's men might be waiting. The old Sullivan mine appeared ahead, its weathered wooden structures stark against the night sky. Jim led her toward a cabin that had once housed the mine's office, now repurposed as the outlaw's hideout. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over rough furnishings, a table, several chairs, bedrolls spread on the floor. "Sit," Jim instructed, gesturing to a chair as he secured her horse outside. "Boss will be here soon, one way or another." Cassandra obeyed, using the moment to assess her surroundings. The cabin had 2 doors, the main entrance and a smaller one at the back, plus windows on all sides. A rifle hung on the wall, and she noticed a shotgun propped in the corner. "Are there more of you?" she asked, trying to sound conversational rather than calculating. Jim hesitated, then shook his head. "Just us 6. Used to be more before." He trailed off, his young face troubled. "Before my father's actions drove you to this life," Cassandra suggested gently. Jim looked at her sharply. "Boss told you about that, some of it." She leaned forward slightly. "How did you come to ride with Thornton?" "My pa's ranch bordered yours," Jim explained after a moment. "When the creek was diverted, our cattle started dying. Pa took out loans to drill a well, but it wasn't enough. Your father offered to buy our land for 1/4 of what it was worth. When Pa refused, the bank foreclosed a bank where your father sits on the board." Each word felt like a physical blow to Cassandra. She had known her father was ambitious, determined to build the largest cattle operation in the territory, but she had never imagined he would deliberately ruin others to achieve his goals. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Truly, if I had known, what could you have done?" Jim interrupted, his tone more resigned than angry. "You're just a woman, even with your fancy education. Your father doesn't answer to anyone, least of all his daughter." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Jim grabbed the shotgun and moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "It's the boss," he reported with relief, lowering the weapon. "And the others, all of them." Moments later, Thornton burst through the door, his face flushed with exertion and what looked like triumph. "We lost them in the hills," he announced. "Shot one of their horses out from under them. That'll slow them down." Cassandra's heart clenched with fear. "Was anyone hurt, worried about your deputy?" Thornton asked shrewdly. "He seemed mighty concerned about you for a man just doing his job." "I'm concerned about needless bloodshed," Cassandra replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You promised no one would be harmed if I came with you voluntarily. And I keep my promises," Thornton assured her. "We fired at horses, not men." "Though your deputy seemed less restrained, he winged Charlie pretty good." He gestured to one of his men, who was having his arm bandaged by another. Relief flooded through Cassandra. Thomas was alive and still pursuing them. But now what? Thornton had her and clearly had grievances against her father that she was beginning to believe might be justified, yet that didn't excuse kidnapping or threatening innocent people. "What happens now, Mr. Thornton?" she asked directly. "You have me. What do you intend to do?" Thornton pulled up a chair across from her, his expression serious. "Now we negotiate. Your father values 2 things in this world, his land and his daughter. I've tried taking his land through legal means and failed. Let's see if he's more amenable when his daughter's freedom is at stake." "What do you want from him?" "Water rights to Bear Creek restored to the original ranchers, compensation for those who lost their homes and livelihoods, and a written confession of his illegal activities to be published in every newspaper in the territory." Thornton leaned forward, his eyes intense. I don't want his money, Miss Wells. I want justice. Cassandra considered his demands. If what he said about her father was true, they weren't unreasonable, though she doubted Edmund would see it that way. And if he refuses? Then I'll have to find other means of persuasion, Thornton said grimly. Though I'd prefer to avoid that. Despite what you may think of me, I'm not a monster, just a man pushed beyond endurance. The sincerity in his voice gave Cassandra pause. She had been raised to see the world in clear moral terms. Lawmen were good, outlaws were bad, but the reality before her was far more complex. Thornton had committed crimes, yes, but perhaps driven by a genuine injustice that the law had failed to address. Write your terms, she decided suddenly. I'll add my own endorsement if what you say proves true. My father respects my judgment even when he disagrees with it. Thornton looked surprised. You'd side with your father's enemy. I'd side with the truth, Cassandra corrected him. If my father has done what you claim, he should make amends. That's justice, isn't it? What we both want. Before Thornton could respond, a shout came from outside, followed by a gunshot. One of the outlaws burst through the door, his face panicked. They've found us, lawmen surrounding the camp. Thornton sprang to his feet, drawing his revolver. How many? At least a dozen. Wells is with them. The man's eyes darted to Cassandra. They're demanding we release the girl and surrender. Thornton's expression hardened as he turned to Cassandra. Looks like negotiations will have to wait. Jim, guard her. The rest of you, positions. He moved to the window, peering out at the darkened landscape where the shadows of armed men could be seen converging on the cabin. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed, Cassandra pleaded, rising from her chair. Let me speak to them. We can still resolve this peacefully. It's too late for peace, Thornton replied, though she detected a hint of regret in his voice. Your father and his pet lawman won't be satisfied with anything less than my hanging. Deputy Prescott is a fair man, Cassandra insisted. If you explain your grievances, Prescott has his own reasons for wanting me dead, Thornton cut her off. Did he tell you about Colorado, about his brother-in-law? Cassandra frowned. He mentioned he lost someone. During a bank robbery, Thornton confirmed. A robbery I was accused of leading, though I was 200 miles away at the time, but Prescott never believed that. He's been hunting me ever since, convinced I'm responsible for his sister's widowhood. And are you? Cassandra asked quietly. Thornton met her gaze directly. No. But it doesn't matter now. The truth rarely does in this world. A voice called out from the darkness outside. Thomas's voice, amplified and steady. Thornton, we have you surrounded. Send out Miss Wells and throw down your weapons. This is your only warning. Thornton turned to his men. Get ready. When they rush us, focus your fire on the lawmen, not the ranchers. They're just following orders. Wait, Cassandra stepped forward, placing herself between Thornton and the door. Let me talk to them, please. I can explain what you've told me, make them understand. They won't listen, Thornton insisted. Thomas will, Cassandra said with more confidence than she felt. He believes in justice, real justice. If what you've said is true, he'll want to investigate, not just gun you down. Thornton hesitated, visibly torn between his instinct for battle and the possibility, however slim, of a resolution that didn't end with more death. You really believe that? I do, Cassandra affirmed. Let me try. What do you have to lose? After a long moment, Thornton nodded. All right. But no tricks. My men will still have their weapons trained on the door. One wrong move from them, and this place becomes a battlefield. I understand. Cassandra moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Thornton, whatever happens, I promise to investigate your claims about my father. If they're true, I'll see justice done one way or another. Something like respect flickered in Thornton's eyes. You're a remarkable woman, Miss Wells, in another life. He shook his head. Go, talk to your deputy, see if he's as committed to justice as you believe. Cassandra stepped onto the porch, her hands raised to show she was unarmed. The night air was cool on her face, a welcome relief after the tension inside the cabin. Thomas, she called into the darkness. Deputy Prescott, Cassandra, his voice came from behind a large boulder to her left. Are you hurt? I'm unharmed, she assured him. I need to speak with you, it's important. There was a moment of silence, then Thomas emerged from cover, his revolver at his side but not holstered. He moved cautiously toward the cabin, his eyes scanning for any sign of an ambush. "That's far enough," Thornton called from inside. "We can all hear you from there, Deputy." Thomas stopped about 20 feet from the porch, his gaze fixed on Cassandra, searching for any sign of duress. "What's this about? Are they forcing you to intercede for them?" "No," Cassandra replied firmly. "I'm here of my own free will, asking you to listen before more blood is shed. Mr. Thornton has made serious allegations against my father, allegations that I believe warrant investigation rather than immediate violent resolution." Thomas's expression tightened. "Thornton is a wanted man, Cassandra. He's killed people. Whatever grievances he claims my father diverted Bear Creek illegally, destroying multiple ranches," Cassandra interrupted. "That he bribed officials, stole evidence, and may have been responsible for the death of Mr. Thornton's wife in a suspicious fire. These are serious charges, Thomas, that deserve proper investigation." From the shadows beyond Thomas, she heard her father's voice, strained with anger. "This is absurd. The girl has been with these outlaws for hours. Who knows what lies they've filled her head with?" "They're not lies if they can be proven," Cassandra called back. "And I intend to see them investigated, with or without your cooperation, Father." A tense silence followed her declaration. Thomas looked torn, his sense of duty warring with his respect for Cassandra and his own commitment to justice. "What does Thornton want?" he finally asked. "Water rights restored to the original ranchers, compensation for those who lost their livelihoods." "And a public acknowledgement of any wrongdoing," Cassandra replied, "in exchange for which he'll surrender peacefully." Thomas glanced toward where Edmund stood concealed. "These are legal matters beyond my authority to negotiate." "Then take him into custody and ensure he gets a fair trial," Cassandra pressed. "With proper legal representation and the opportunity to present his evidence. That's all I'm asking, Thomas. A chance for the truth to be heard." "The truth?" Edmund scoffed, stepping into view despite Thomas's warning gesture. "The truth is that Wade Thornton is a thief and a murderer who has kidnapped my daughter to extort concessions he couldn't win legally. Is it extortion to demand what was stolen from you?" Thornton called from inside the cabin. "You're the real thief, Wells. You've just been smart enough to have the law on your side while you do it." Edmund's face flushed with rage. "I've built everything I have through hard work and honest business, honest." Thornton emerged onto the porch beside Cassandra, his revolver lowered but still in his hand. "Was it honest to bribe Judge Hollister to rule in your favor on the Bear Creek dispute? Was it honest to have your men threaten the surveyor who tried to testify that the creek's course had been illegally altered on official maps?" Thomas raised his gun slightly, his attention now divided between Thornton and Edmund, whose expression had shifted from anger to something like alarm. "These are serious accusations," Thomas said slowly. "If there's evidence, there was evidence," Thornton insisted, "before Wells had it stolen from my lawyer's office, but there are still witnesses. The surveyor. The former water commissioner who took the bribe but might talk for the right immunity. People who know the truth." Edmund's hand moved toward his coat, where Cassandra knew he kept a small derringer for protection. "This is ridiculous. I won't stand here and be slandered by a common criminal." "Father, don't," Cassandra warned, seeing the movement. "Please, if what Mr. Thornton says isn't true, you have nothing to fear from an investigation." "I don't answer to criminals or to naive young women who believe their sob stories," Edmund snapped, his hand continuing its motion. Thomas noticed it too. "Mr. Wells, keep your hands where I can see them." But Edmund was beyond listening. His hand emerged with the derringer, raising it toward Thornton. "I'm ending this farce now. Several things happened at once." Thomas shouted a warning. Cassandra moved instinctively to place herself between her father and Thornton. And a shot rang out, the sound echoing across the mining camp. For a moment, no one moved. Then Edmund staggered backward, a look of shock on his face as he stared at Thomas, whose revolver was now pointed directly at him. "You shot me," Edmund gasped, looking down at the spreading stain on his shoulder. "You chose him over me." I chose to prevent a murder, Thomas replied, his voice tight with strain. Lower your weapon, Mr. Wells, now. Edmund's derringer clattered to the ground. Behind Cassandra, she heard Thornton's men emerging from the cabin, their weapons still drawn but held uncertainly as they witnessed this unexpected turn of events. Thomas gestured to Sheriff Blackburn, who had emerged from cover. Get Mr. Wells' medical attention. And take Thornton and his men into custody, but proper custody with all legal protections. They're to stand trial, not face vigilante justice. As Blackburn and the other deputies moved in, Cassandra approached her father, who was being supported by two of his ranch hands. Why? She asked simply. Why would you try to kill an unarmed man rather than face an investigation? Edmund's face was pale with pain and something that might have been shame. You wouldn't understand. I did what I had to do to build something lasting, something that would be yours one day. At the cost of other people's lives and livelihoods, Cassandra shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. That's not a legacy I want, Father, not if it's built on suffering. She turned away, unable to bear the sight of him any longer. Thomas stood nearby, overseeing the peaceful surrender of Thornton's men, his face grave but resolute. Thank you, she said quietly as she approached him. For doing what was right, not just what was expected. Thomas holstered his weapon, his eyes troubled as he looked at her. I'm not sure your father will see it that way, or the territorial authorities. Wells has powerful friends. Then we'll need powerful evidence, Cassandra replied. Mr. Thornton believes it exists, we just need to find it. We, Thomas raised an eyebrow. Yes, we. Cassandra met his gaze directly. Unless you'd prefer I undertake this investigation alone, which would be considerably more difficult given that I lack your official authority. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips, despite the gravity of the situation. Are you always this determined, Miss Wells? Always, Deputy Prescott. She glanced toward Thornton, who was being handcuffed but treated with notable restraint by the deputies. Justice isn't just about enforcing the law. Sometimes it's about questioning whether the law itself is just. Thomas nodded slowly. A philosophy I find myself increasingly sympathetic to. He offered her his arm. Come, let's get you back to town. This night has been long enough, and tomorrow promises to be even longer. As they walked toward the waiting horses, Cassandra felt a strange mixture of emotions: grief for the father she thought she had known, determination to uncover the truth regardless of where it led, and an unexpected warmth for the man beside her, who had chosen principle over expedience when it mattered most. The journey back to Wildwood was just beginning, both literally and figuratively. But for the first time since the bandit had grabbed her at the fair, Cassandra felt truly free, not just from external threat, but from the constraints of expectations and assumptions that had limited her vision of what was possible and what was right. The days following the confrontation at Sullivan Mine brought dramatic changes to Wildwood and to Cassandra's life. Her father was treated for his wound, which proved relatively minor, then placed under house arrest at the ranch, while investigations into Thornton's allegations proceeded. Judge Hollister, upon learning of the accusations against him, hastily left the territory, which many took as a tacit admission of guilt. Cassandra threw herself into the investigation, working alongside Thomas to interview witnesses, review documents, and piece together the true story of Bear Creek and other disputed properties. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Thornton's claims had merit. Edmund Wells had indeed used his wealth and influence to manipulate the system for his own benefit, often with devastating consequences for smaller ranchers. It's all here, Cassandra said one evening, spreading papers across Thomas's desk in the jailhouse. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the dance, and they had spent most of that time together, their professional collaboration gradually evolving into something more personal. The original survey maps showing Bear Creek's natural course. The falsified versions that appeared after Father's donation to the Territorial Record Office. Statements from 3 former homesteaders confirming they were threatened when they refused to sell. Thomas studied the evidence, his expression grim but not surprised. It's enough to bring charges. The territorial prosecutor arrived this morning. He'll want to see all of this. Cassandra nodded, trying to maintain her composure despite the pain of seeing her father's misdeeds laid bare. And what of Mr. Thornton? Will he be charged as well? For the kidnapping, yes, Thomas acknowledged. But given the circumstances and your testimony about his treatment of you, the prosecutor believes he can avoid the more serious charges, especially if… He hesitated. If what? Cassandra prompted. If you're willing to testify that you went with him voluntarily at the dance and that he made no threats against you during your captivity. Thomas watched her carefully. It's the truth, but it would mean publicly opposing your father. Are you prepared for that? Cassandra squared her shoulders. I've been opposing him since we returned from the mine, Thomas. I won't stop now, not when justice hangs in the balance. A hint of a smile touched Thomas's lips. You never cease to amaze me, Cassandra Wells. Is that a good thing, Deputy? She asked, allowing herself a small smile in return. The best thing, he said softly, his hand moving to cover hers on the desk. Though it does make my life considerably more complicated. The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her, a now familiar sensation that she had stopped trying to deny or resist. Over the past 2 weeks, their long hours working together had created a bond that transcended their initial roles as lawman and citizen. They had shared meals, conversations that stretched late into the night, and a growing mutual respect that had blossomed into something deeper. Complicated can be good, Cassandra ventured, turning her hand beneath his so their palms met. It means life isn't simple or predictable. Thomas's fingers intertwined with hers. Is that what you want? A life that isn't predictable? I want a life that matters, Cassandra replied honestly. One where I can make a difference, where I'm valued for my mind and my convictions, not just as someone's daughter or someone's wife. She met his gaze directly. Is that too much to ask? Not from me, Thomas assured her, his voice low and sincere. I've never met anyone like you, Cassandra. When I first saw you at the fair, standing up to that bandit, I thought you were either the bravest or the most foolish woman I'd ever encountered. And now, she challenged, her heart beating faster. Now I know you're the bravest and the most principled and the most infuriatingly independent. His thumb traced circles on her palm. And I find myself thinking about you far more than is appropriate for a deputy investigating a case. Cassandra felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Perhaps the deputy should conclude his investigation soon then, so he can pursue other interests. Thomas's smile widened. Perhaps he should. He leaned forward slightly, his intent clear in his eyes. The jailhouse door swung open before their lips could meet, forcing them to pull apart hastily. Sheriff Blackburn entered, followed by a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, the territorial prosecutor, Cassandra presumed. Miss Wells, Blackburn greeted her with a nod. I see you and Deputy Prescott are still hard at work. This is Mr. Harrison from the prosecutor's office in Helena. Cassandra rose to greet him, smoothing her skirts and hoping her flushed cheeks weren't too noticeable. Mr. Harrison, I hope you'll find our evidence satisfactory. Harrison surveyed the documents spread across the desk with keen interest. From what Sheriff Blackburn has told me, Miss Wells, you've been instrumental in uncovering a pattern of corruption that extends well beyond your father's activities. That cannot have been easy for you. It wasn't, Cassandra acknowledged, but truth and justice must take precedence over family loyalty when that loyalty requires turning a blind eye to wrongdoing. Harrison studied her with new respect, a principled stance and a courageous one. I understand you're also prepared to testify regarding Wade Thornton's treatment of you during your, let's call it your unconventional negotiation. I am, Cassandra confirmed. Mr. Thornton committed crimes, yes, but he was driven to them by injustices that the law failed to address. That context should be considered in any proceedings against him. Indeed. Harrison turned to Thomas. Deputy Prescott, I'd like to review this evidence in detail, and I'll need to speak with both Thornton and Edmund Wells before making my final determinations on charges. Thomas nodded. Of course. We have Thornton in custody here, and Mr. Wells is under guard at his ranch. We can arrange meetings with both tomorrow." As they discussed logistics, Cassandra gathered her personal belongings, preparing to return to the small room she had taken at the town's boarding house. She had not returned to the ranch since the night of the confrontation, unable to face living under her father's roof while working to expose his crimes. It had been a lonely time, but not without purpose, and not without the growing comfort of Thomas's presence in her life. When the men concluded their discussion, Thomas offered to walk her to the boarding house, as he had each night for the past 2 weeks. Outside, the streets of Wildwood were quiet, the autumn air crisp with the promise of winter not far off. "Mr. Harrison seems thorough," Cassandra observed as they walked side by side, not touching but close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. "He has a reputation for fairness," Thomas agreed. "And for being immune to the kind of influence that has corrupted others in the territorial government. Your father won't be able to buy his way out of these charges." Cassandra sighed. "I still can't quite believe it came to this. When I returned from Boston, I thought I was coming home to help my father build something worthwhile. Instead, I've helped dismantle his empire of corruption." Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her beneath the glow of a street lamp. "You've done what was right, Cassandra." Many would have chosen family over justice, especially when that family was all they had. "Not all," Cassandra said softly, looking up at him. "I've discovered I have more in my life than just my father's legacy. I have my students who still come to lessons despite their parents' mixed feelings about my actions. I have my own principles which have been tested but not broken." She took a deep breath. "And I have you, if that's something you still want given all the complications." Thomas reached up to touch her cheek gently. "It's all I want," he said simply. "The complications are just part of who you are, who we both are, people with convictions, with pasts that have shaped us, with a commitment to something larger than ourselves." This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, there was no interruption. His lips met hers softly at first, then with growing certainty as she responded, her arms slipping around his neck. The kiss held both tenderness and promise of understanding, of acceptance, of a future neither of them could have imagined when they first met at the harvest fair. When they finally parted, Cassandra felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her world, rearranging everything she thought she knew about herself and what she wanted. "This isn't how I expected my return to Wildwood to unfold," she admitted with a small laugh. "No." Thomas smiled, his hands still resting lightly at her waist. "What did you expect? To teach? To gradually convince my father to support educational initiatives for the territory, to eventually return east, perhaps, and continue my studies?" She shook her head wonderingly. "I never expected to be kidnapped at a fair to discover my father's corruption, or to fall in love with the deputy who tried to rescue me." "Fall in love," Thomas repeated, his smile widening. "Is that what this is?" Cassandra felt a moment of panic at her own boldness, but it faded as she saw the joy in his eyes. "Yes," she said firmly, "that's exactly what it is, though I reserve the right to remain independent and occasionally infuriating, as you put it." Thomas laughed, the sound warm in the quiet street. "I wouldn't have it any other way." He pulled her close again, his expression growing more serious. "I love you, Cassandra Wells, your courage, your principles, your determination to make the world better. I loved you when you stood up to that bandit at the fair, and when you declared you were spoken for by no man. I've loved you more each day since, watching you choose right over easy, truth over comfort." Cassandra felt tears prick at her eyes, touched by the depth of his understanding and acceptance. "And I love you, Thomas Prescott, for seeing me as I am, not as what others expect me to be, for standing for justice even when it cost you, for believing in me." Their second kiss was deeper, a sealing of promises spoken and unspoken. When it ended, Thomas offered her his arm to continue their walk to the boarding house, a gentleman's gesture that somehow felt different now, not an assumption of possession, but a partnership freely chosen. The following weeks brought resolution to the tumultuous events that had begun at the harvest fair. Edmund Wells stood trial for corruption, fraud, and multiple counts of intimidation. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his defense was undermined by his own arrogance on the witness stand. He was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison, his vast holdings placed in trust pending further legal proceedings. Wade Thornton received a much lighter sentence, 2 years, with the possibility of early release for good behavior after Cassandra's testimony about his treatment of her and his motivations. The former rancher accepted his punishment with dignity, expressing regret for his methods while maintaining the justice of his cause. Most significant for the community, Judge Hollister's replacement ordered a comprehensive review of all land and water rights in the territory, with a mandate to restore property to those who had been illegally dispossessed. Several of the homesteaders who had lost their land, including Jim's family, were able to return to their former properties and begin rebuilding their lives. Through it all, Thomas and Cassandra worked side by side, he continuing his duties as deputy, while she divided her time between teaching and advocating for the dispossessed families. Their relationship deepened as they faced the challenges together, building a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose that transcended the conventional courtship patterns of the day. On a crisp December morning 6 months after their first encounter, Thomas found Cassandra at her schoolhouse, helping her students decorate for the Christmas celebration. The children had grown fond of the deputy, greeting him with excited chatter as he entered. Deputy Prescott. Billy, the geometry enthusiast, called out, "Miss Wells is teaching us about Christmas traditions from around the world. Did you know in Holland they put shoes by the fire instead of stockings?" Thomas smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "I did not know that, Billy. That's fascinating." He glanced at Cassandra, who was watching the interaction with obvious pleasure. "I wonder if Miss Wells might spare a moment for me outside." Cassandra nodded, instructing the children to continue with their paper chains before joining Thomas on the schoolhouse steps. "What brings you here in the middle of the day? Not more legal matters, I hope." "No, nothing like that." Thomas seemed uncharacteristically nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I wanted to ask you something, and I couldn't wait until our dinner this evening." Cassandra raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his demeanor. "Ask away, deputy." Thomas took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Cassandra Wells, these past months have been the most challenging and the most rewarding of my life. We've faced danger together, uncovered truth together, and built something I never expected to find on the frontier, a partnership of equals, founded on respect and love." Cassandra's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. Thomas. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring of sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I know you value your independence, and I would never ask you to surrender it, but I'm hoping you might consider sharing your life with me as my wife and partner in all things. I promise to support your teaching, your advocacy, your occasional insistence on doing things your own way." A smile tugged at his lips. "In short, I promise to love you exactly as you are if you'll do me the honor of becoming my wife." Tears welled in Cassandra's eyes as she looked at the man before her, strong yet gentle, principled yet compassionate, everything she had never known she wanted until fate brought them together at the harvest fair. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady despite her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Prescott. Not because I need a protector or provider, but because I want a partner who sees me truly and loves me completely." Thomas's face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. Behind them, the schoolhouse door creaked open, revealing a line of grinning children who had been eavesdropping shamelessly. "Miss Wells is going to marry Deputy Prescott," Billy announced, leading to a chorus of cheers and giggles. Cassandra laughed through her tears, not embarrassed in the slightest. "Yes, I am, and I expect all of you to be on your best behavior at the wedding." "When will it be?" asked Sally, a shy girl of 10 who had blossomed under Cassandra's teaching. Thomas and Cassandra exchanged a look of mutual understanding. "Spring," they said in unison, then laughed at their synchronicity. Spring is a time of new beginnings, Thomas explained to the children, and Miss Wells and I are looking forward to beginning our life together then. As the children peppered them with questions about the wedding, Cassandra felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. 6 months ago, she had declared to a bandit and a deputy that she was spoken for by no man. Now she was choosing, freely and joyfully, to bind her life to Thomas's not in submission, but in partnership. The wedding took place on a perfect spring day, with wildflowers carpeting the meadow where they exchanged their vows. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with many of the homesteaders who had regained their land thanks to Cassandra and Thomas's efforts. Even Wade Thornton, recently released from prison, attended with the blessing of both bride and groom, a living testament to their belief in redemption and second chances. In a departure from tradition, Cassandra wrote her own vows, promising not obedience but partnership, not submission but support. Thomas responded in kind, vowing to honor her independence as much as her commitment to him. Sheriff Blackburn, who performed the ceremony, pronounced them husband and wife, equal in all things, a phrase that brought approving nods from some and raised eyebrows from others. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. As Thomas led Cassandra in a waltz, much like the one they had shared at Founder's Day, he leaned close to whisper in her ear. "You remember what I said when that bandit grabbed you at the fair?" Cassandra smiled, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You said I was spoken for, as I recall." And I quite forcefully corrected that assumption. Thomas nodded, spinning her gracefully under his arm. "You were right to do so. No one should claim another person without their consent." He drew her back to him, his expression tender. "But now I can truly say you're spoken for because you've chosen to be of your own free will. And I'm spoken for as well by the most remarkable woman I've ever known." Cassandra kissed him, heedless of the watching crowd. "We're both spoken for," she agreed. "By each other to each other with each other. As equals, as partners, as love demands." As the stars wheeled overhead and their friends and neighbors celebrated around them, Cassandra and Thomas danced together, their steps perfectly matched, their hearts beating as one. From an unlikely beginning, a bandit's grasp, a lawman's intervention, a woman's declaration of independence had grown a love stronger than convention, truer than tradition, and as vast as the Montana sky above them. 5 years later, the schoolhouse that had once stood at the edge of the Wells Ranch had grown into a proper school building in the heart of Wildwood, with 3 classrooms, a small library, and a playground filled with children's laughter. Cassandra Prescott, who had kept her maiden name for professional purposes while taking her husband's name in their personal life, stood on the steps, watching as the last of her students departed for the day. At 30, she had lost none of the determination that had defined her younger self, though motherhood had softened some of her sharper edges. Her hand rested absently on her rounded belly, where their second child grew steadily larger each day. "Mama." A small voice called out as a dark-haired girl of 3 ran toward her from the direction of the jailhouse down the street. Behind her walked Thomas, now Wildwood's sheriff following Blackburn's retirement the previous year. Cassandra knelt to embrace her daughter. "Hello, my darling. Did you have a good time with Papa at his office?" "I helped," the child declared proudly. "I put the papers in the right places and fed the prisoner his lunch." Thomas reached them, smiling at his daughter's enthusiastic report. "She's quite the deputy already." Though I should clarify that the prisoner was just Carson, who was watching the office while I took some paperwork to the judge. Cassandra laughed, accepting Thomas's hand to help her rise. "Well, Emma, perhaps you'll follow in your father's footsteps one day." "Or her mother's," Thomas suggested, placing a gentle hand on Cassandra's belly. "How are you feeling today? Any better?" "Much," Cassandra assured him. "The morning sickness seems to have passed finally. Dr. Williams says everything looks perfect." They walked together toward their home, a comfortable house halfway between the school and the sheriff's office, with a garden Cassandra tended in her sparse free time, and a workshop where Thomas crafted furniture in his. Wildwood had changed significantly in the 5 years since their marriage. The town had grown, thanks in part to the fair redistribution of land and water rights that followed Edmund Wells's conviction. Smaller ranches and farms now dotted the landscape, their owners united by a commitment to cooperative rather than competitive use of resources. Edmund himself had died in prison the previous year, refusing to the end to acknowledge his wrongdoing or to reconcile with his daughter. Cassandra had mourned not so much the man he was, but the father he could have been, and had made peace with her role in bringing his crimes to light. As they approached their house, a familiar figure waited on their porch. Wade Thornton, now a respectable rancher himself on a modest spread north of town. After his release from prison, he had worked to rebuild his life with the same determination he had once applied to seeking vengeance. To many people's surprise, he and Thomas had developed a genuine friendship, bound by their mutual respect for Cassandra and their shared belief in justice. "Uncle Wade," Emma squealed, breaking free from her parents to race toward him. Thornton scooped her up with a grin. "There's my favorite deputy. I brought you something from my trip to Helena." He produced a small wooden horse, expertly carved and painted. "What do you say, Emma?" Cassandra prompted as they reached the porch. "Thank you, Uncle Wade," the child recited dutifully before immediately becoming absorbed in her new toy. Thomas shook Thornton's hand warmly. "Good to see you, Wade. How was the territorial legislature?" Since his rehabilitation, Thornton had become an advocate for land reform, eventually being elected as Wildwood's representative to the territorial government. His experiences as both victim and outlaw gave him a unique perspective that had proven valuable in crafting new laws to protect small landowners. "Productive," Thornton replied. "The Water Rights Bill passed, ensuring no one can divert natural waterways for private use without community approval. And the Homesteader Protection Act looks promising for next session." Cassandra smiled with satisfaction. "That's wonderful news. Would you like to stay for dinner? I made enough stew for an army, as usual." "I'd be honored," Thornton accepted, following them inside. As Thomas helped Emma wash up and Cassandra set the table, adding an extra place for their guest, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment of domestic tranquility. From a confrontation at a fair that could have ended in tragedy, they had forged something remarkable, not just a marriage or a family, but a community transformed by principles of justice and equality. Later, after dinner and conversation, after Emma had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, after Thornton had departed with promises to return for Sunday dinner, Cassandra and Thomas sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. "I had a letter from Jim today," Thomas mentioned, his arm around Cassandra's shoulders. "He's completed his law studies in Denver and plans to return to Wildwood to open a practice." Cassandra smiled, remembering the young outlaw who had guarded her at the Sullivan Mine and who had later testified against both Thornton and Edmund Wells before accepting Thomas's offer of a second chance. "That's wonderful. We could use another good lawyer here, especially one who understands the struggles of the homesteaders. I thought you'd be pleased." Thomas's fingers traced gentle patterns on her shoulder. "You never gave up on him, even when others doubted he could change." "People deserve the opportunity to become more than their worst mistakes," Cassandra replied simply. "You taught me that with how you treated Wade despite your history with him." Thomas was quiet for a moment, gazing up at the stars. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if that bandit hadn't grabbed you at the fair, if our paths had never crossed?" Cassandra considered the question. "Sometimes, but I think we would have found each other eventually, one way or another." "Some connections are inevitable, don't you think? Like you in teaching, me in the law," Thomas smiled. "Us in this town, exactly." Cassandra turned her face up to his. "Though I'm grateful we didn't have to wait any longer than we did, these 5 years have been the richest of my life." Thomas leaned down to kiss her, still with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their first kiss on a Wildwood street corner. Mine too, Mrs. Prescott, even with all your independence and occasional infuriating habits. Cassandra laughed softly. You wouldn't have me any other way. No, he agreed, his hand moving to rest on her belly, where their child stirred as if in response to his touch. I wouldn't change a single thing about you or about us. As the night deepened around them and the lights of Wildwood twinkled in the distance, Cassandra nestled closer to her husband, content in the knowledge that she had found her place in the world not as someone's possession or appendage, but as a woman fully herself, fully loved, and fully free to love in return. From a moment of danger and defiance at a country fair had grown a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. She was spoken for, yes, by love, by purpose, by the community she had helped to build. And that, Cassandra knew, was the greatest freedom of all,